Okay, thank you.
I'm joined by Adjutant General Sean Menke, Minnesota National Guard, and Commissioner Paul Snell, Department of Corrections, also working closely with Department of Public Safety. And as all of you are watching the events unfold tonight, as I was, on a day when we started thinking about getting our kids back to school and starting to resume some of those things that bring such pleasure in life, we once again see the unrest on our streets. And not just Minnesota, but as a nation, this pain continues on. We saw it earlier with our neighbors in Wisconsin and Kenosha and the Jacob Blake killing and the responses to it and the pain and the anguish. And it continues on. And tonight in Minneapolis, we saw violence and looting that has no place in this. And I just want to be very clear. The pain that people are feeling is real. The situation that was sparked again and reminds all of us of that, watching that 8.5 minutes of George Floyd's death, those are real. Those are real emotions that are out there. But to come together and fix those issues, they're not going to be fixed with violence or looting Target. They're not going to be fixed, and our mental health crisis is not going to be fixed by spreading false rumors about a situation that was unfolding. We had the tragic loss of 2 people, did not involve a police or police shooting, and the situation has gotten to the point now where it is absolutely unacceptable. Having people's rights to peacefully protest, you've seen it and we continue to say it. We want to protect those rights. We want to create that space. And here in Minnesota, I want to say we came together as a state and bipartisanly to move legislation that maybe did not go far enough, but it started to address these very issues. And all of that good work cannot be pushed backwards by unlawful behavior. It is simply unacceptable, and it's for that reason, in communications with the city of Minneapolis when this situation started to go, that we use state assets in the National Guard and Joint Powers Agreements, DNR, and others, and use the executive order of the mobilization of the National Guard. The request came to us, I believe, at 9:16 p.m., and our units are moving to make sure that calm and the space to have the important conversation that is ongoing and the space to grieve when we saw Kenosha or George Floyd or St. Louis or wherever this is happening across the country. So it's not just confined to here, and it's an important conversation. But that conversation will never happen where violence rules, where people do not feel the ability to be safe. And those are things that we fully intend this evening to restore, and then we can have that conversation. So I can tell Minnesotans, once again, this pain continues to come. We're going to have to continue as a nation to take these tough issues head on. We're going to have to continue to, as a state and as a nation, be willing to separate clearly the needs for positive reforms and the grievances and systemic racism that is driving many people to a sense of desperation, and clearly separate those from unlawful, reckless, and dangerous behavior that's not associated with those. And we can do that. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. So what I can tell you is we continue to get the updates. We have time for a couple of questions. The state resources are being deployed as we speak in conjunction with the city of Minneapolis and Minneapolis Police Department.
However, what is the situation down there now in terms of the level of civil unrest, and what are your intentions of National Guard, additional National Guard deployment? How much National Guard do you have available?
So good evening, Paul Snell, the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections. I've been in close contact this evening with Commissioner Harrington from the Department of Public Safety, as well as State Patrol Colonel Matt Langer. Currently, Minneapolis Police, along with the State Patrol and other law enforcement entities, are working to reestablish calm. There remains, appears to be smaller groups of people that are spread out in different locations, and those groups are being tracked, and resources are being dispatched to those locations with the sole objective of enforcing the curfew that's in place and making arrests. And we want to be really clear that at this stage, The objective is we want to clear downtown to restore the calm that the governor talked about. That's the mission at hand, and that's what's happening presently. We do know that there still is bottles being thrown. There still is commercial-grade fireworks being deployed. There has been reports of some shots fired. But ultimately, we are working as a collective group to restore calm. And I'll let the governor
And I
speak
would
to it.
follow up on the question with General Mankey. When we spoke to the city of Minneapolis and started earlier in the evening as they were assessing the situation, our response was that at that time they did not need state resources, but we would prepare. And in doing so, I made sure that General Mankey was starting to think about what those numbers would look like. We can do a warning order to get ready, but it takes, again, I think we've all become very familiar with this, the official request that came in at 9:16, and then those movements were ready to go. And those troops are specialized, they're military police units, and as I said, they will be on the ground as we speak.
Are we able to, and maybe the Adjutant General can tell us how soon a certain amount of troops will be available, like by what amount of time, and then from that point forward?
Yeah, as the governor said, we initiated movement immediately, and it takes a while for us to muster and deploy those forces. But we have forces on the ground that are preparing to deploy right now.
And are you prepared to increase those number of forces if necessary, to what levels, or maybe that's a question for the governor?
Yeah, and I think we'll work with the governor's staff and Commissioner of Public Safety and Colonel Langer and assess it, look at it, and assess the situation. And yes, we're prepared to increase the forces if we need to increase the forces.
But Governor, to clarify, Minnesota State Patrol is already on the ground in
Correct.
Minneapolis?
DNR and the other joint powers.
Are there any guard troops now in Minneapolis, and how long until they're there?
As of right now, there are no guard troops in Minneapolis, but they will be ready to deploy here shortly.
And Governor, the curfew, what is the intent in terms of how long will that go? Will you reassess it at some point? And can you give any policy?
Well, it was a city's decision. We'll work with them, and we certainly their plans to do so, and certainly we concur with that at this point in time. The curfew seems to work best. We'll reestablish it. It is it's our hope once again, and I appeal to Minnesotans and again express that the real pain that's out there. We saw it. I've got a 13-year-old following this closely, and he saw very closely how this happened with the NBA and some of the postponements of games over the issues. And so people are in tune to this. They're hurting, they're pain. And I would appeal again to Minnesotans, stay calm, go home tonight if you're not part of this. The assumption is now if you're downtown at this point in time, you will be arrested. You will be part of that. And there's space for peaceful protest. We have continued to see that since the first week of June, that we've been able to do that, and we've seen real change. So we have time for another one or two, Teddy?
Well, Governor, what I'm wondering about is in the national political climate, you know what's going on tonight at the Republican National Convention. Governor Evers has accepted federal troops, as I understand. What is your stance on that as governor of Minnesota? If the president, have you talked to the White House about that? Have there been any offers?
No, I did speak several times, and I've been in close contact with Governor Evers. I do not know about the acceptance of federal troops or help. State of Minnesota is prepared to do what we can do, and General Mankey has been in contact with his peer, the Adjutant General of Wisconsin, in terms of what type of support we can. I would come back to this. I do not know what's happening tonight at the convention, but what I can tell you is America is hurting. And the racial divisions that continue to tear at us demand that this is the time. I keep talking about this, and I'm proud that the legislature was able to move, but I said at the time, the fierce sense of urgency for change is real on that respect. And I think we need to make clear, and I think we're stating unequivocally on this, that we can separate out the pain and the anguish and reforms that need to be done in policing and systemic racism from unlawful, dangerous, and illegal behavior. And those are the folks now, and that's what you're seeing at this point in time. If there was emotion and anger, maybe, but if you're on the streets right now after everything that's happened and the curfew has been put in place, and it's clear that this has nothing to do with asking for reforms, it has everything to do with unlawful behavior, then there should be an expectation you'd be arrested. But I would say, yes, this is part of a larger narrative, It was the flashpoint of George Floyd. It has spread across this nation. It does us no good to try and either divide or ignore or to make it worse or to blame someone. We're just as a state and as a nation going to have to come together and figure out what our next steps are. And I think we started to move in that direction, and I am simply not going to allow us to backslide. I am not going to allow a few folks to disrupt what is an important conversation and movements towards to reforms that need to happen.
All right, folks, we got to wrap there today. Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, everyone.
Back to the office.
Thanks, General.